Hi everyone, my name's Sean Hooper. I work for Amazon Web Services as a transformation architect, and I work with a number of large enterprises here in Australia.
And I'm Max Bausher. I'm a senior solutions consultant with New Relic. Been with the company about 6 years and work with many of you in the crowd. Similar sized companies across Australia and New Zealand.
Terrific. Let's get started, hey? So this is I think ultimately this is a story of partnership. Max and I didn't know each other, but we were both working together separately for with a large enterprise here in Australia in the telecommunications industry. And this telco was working with us, working with New Relic, to overcome a problem that they had with a lot of their legacy systems and wondering what to do about that, as well as with their new systems to keep those continuously optimized, refreshed, and moving forward with their program objectives there. I guess to summarize it, I'm just going to pull up 4 personas that represent some of the people we were dealing with. So Grace here, who as you can see is a real person, represents a typical business owner, and she doesn't really care too much about the technology, but she wants to know that her customers can transact with her business in a fairly frictionless way, and the result of that is that they love and trust her company and her brand and the product offering that they deliver. To get there, Luke, another real person, he has to offer a suite of applications for her salespeople to use, for the people in the call center to use, a pretty broad suite of applications that do a range of different functions for the company to be able to help their customer. And he has to make sure that those systems are there when they promise to be able to deliver those services to customers. If they've got to plan outages, he's got to do a lot of work scheduling that and making sure that everything goes down and comes back up in a smooth way and within very tight windows. Meanwhile, Preston here, he gets the sensational job of making sure that all of the technology delivers on that. He's got to deal with things like SLAs, and he may understand what you mean by an application, but he may not understand what you mean by a particular service when it's actually a set of microservices strung together across dozens or hundreds of VMs or containers or parts of applications and so on. So this is increasingly becoming a very difficult area for someone like Preston to deal with. And then there's this new and evolving role where optimization is something that has to be done in real time. It's got to be fast, it's got to be reactive, it's also still got a planning component to it. Perhaps capacity planning is something that is starting to reduce in this space, but cost optimization and effective utilization of resources is really coming to the fore. So these people all have their difficult jobs like all of us and so on. But ultimately they're just trying to run a business, satisfy their customers, and using technology to do it. The thing is, it'd be nice if our technology was even that simple. This is like a baby VMware farm just showing up here that might deliver one of your apps. For this particular telco, they have, about 100,000 servers. They have an incredibly complex environment and a technology stack that goes back for decades. And that's still delivering perfectly good applications that are still delivering 24/7, 365, but it's hard to do anything to it, and it's hard to understand where your service comes from out of that stack. Imagine even just trying to understand what's happening to your app in this very simple VMware environment, or if it was an environment made up of Docker containers orchestrated with Kubernetes. For starters, I'm pretty sure Grace would have a perspective, but it probably wouldn't relate very closely to this. Similarly, the application owner would think he understands what he's talking about when he talks about the CRM or the billing system, but there could be hundreds of components underneath that that deliver that function. Then go and try and make sure that all of it's operating correctly according to what they want and optimize it. So lots of different points of view across something that's really complicated because of its disparity. And ultimately, because we can't see what's going on through our particular lens. So, what are we going to do about that? Well, The fact that we have to do something about it seems to be the problem. Everyone's going on some sort of journey. Maybe it's something like this. Maybe you're adopting cloud, maybe you're moving an application to cloud. And it doesn't matter if it's a cloud native suite of tools that you're using. It doesn't matter if you're migrating legacy environments or just things that weren't quite built for the cloud and trying to host them on cloud or connect them with applications in cloud. There seem to be all these dangers along the way. But it's just a perception because of that lack of visibility. If we had the data, these scary red icons wouldn't exist in our point of view of what that journey looks like. So that's why New Relic and AWS talk to customers about this, is to make those things go away with data. And the first step, typically when someone says, I want to move to cloud, and I don't know what to do next, that first step requires a lot of discovery. Let's go see what you've got. And from that, we put together a thing called a directional business case. Now, anyone in the audience done a business case before? Real question, not rhetorical. Actual hands of thank you. That's awesome. They're not easy. There's a lot of data collection. There's a lot of understanding, well, who's going to read this? What do they want to understand from it? And then trying to create a basic report that pulls all that together for us. Now, there's a lot of tools available to help. We go in and say, we've got a thing called TSO Logic that can help. But it can only help if it can do the data discovery. Without the data, no report, no clear sight to decision making.
So this is actually where New Relic stepped in this case. So we'd been a long-time vendor and strategic advisor to this particular client. But to the earlier slides, when we were looking at different personas, we had a specific view and interaction with specific types of teams, technical teams, and they went to their specific tools to look at data that they needed. But it provided a different view, right? And each view gave its specific value, but when you put everyone together and try and make a very large decision about migrating critical workloads, you need to have the right view of that data so that everyone can circle around it. And in this case, we were approached by both AWS and this particular customer to help them with that particular need. So what we actually did was we built an integration for this particular environment, which was based in VMware. We built an integration that could pull all the valuable data that New Relic usually you rely on New Relic for. So real-time use resourcing against those particular VMs and hypervisors, and give you that in a way that we could also democratize that data. So we could share it with AWS and give it to AWS to load up and drive those budgets and forecasts and various reporting tools that they need to get help essentially the customer get these budgets approved and these migration projects over the line.
And it struck us that this is something that might be worth sharing, because we would typically go in and say, well, let us do the discovery so we can take this next step. And another tool will come in and say, let us do the discovery so we can take that next step. And typically, each tool will need to run for 4 to 6 weeks doing data collection so that you've got something useful to consider and you've got all of your weekly and monthly batches considered in your decision making. Well, that delays you 4 to 6 weeks, whereas New Relic were already in the environment. It was already the tool of choice for this whole environment. So we said, well, New Relic, can you give us the data? And so we fed that directly into our own business case tool. Thing is, then they came along, actually I think it was Max's fault and probably a couple of others, that said, well, we can also do some of that analysis. And we're providing some real-time dashboards that were showing what cost optimization could look like on exactly what they were monitoring in real time. So understanding your environment and understanding what AWS offers and all public pricing and so on, the real-time dashboards were showing us this environment could be right-sized and you would save X dollars. So we were scratching our heads going, well, this information is already available to the customer. Why aren't they using that? And so sometimes there's two parts to it. Maybe that would help them in a continuous optimization mode. When you're choosing to do something big, you need this business case model. But you've now got two tools or two ways of presenting that information from the same discovery that was done by New Relic. So anyway, after you get a get some interest in this proposition, and you think, well, yeah, we'd like to do this. That's taken away a lot of the complexity and a lot of the uncertainty. What do we do next? We probably need some detailed plans.
Yeah, so we leverage a lot of what's already existing within the New Relic platform, and then we took it to the next step. So you've seen this pop up a few times in prior presentations, but this concept of a service map. So service maps gave application teams that own the workloads above that underlying infrastructure the ability to see critical dependencies, number of dependencies, the throughput, the typical error rates before they move these workloads. So they can baseline against it. And once they turn traffic over to an AWS-based workload, they can easily identify before and after how successful that migration was. Better yet, you can leave it on in that environment and continue to optimize those applications to be purpose-built for cloud native. In that dependency stage, discovering which services should be moved in which order, service maps provided a really clear tool for certain teams to know when and how they wanted to execute against that migration plan.
So we're starting to see that New Relic was popping up in every pillar where instead of offering a new tool, we were working from the same foundational set of data and just a different set of dashboards and offerings to visualize that data and help us take that next step. Now, probably you didn't realize it at the start of the journey, but that gave the customer a lot of confidence with that continuity as well. So that continuity that each step we're taking, we've got the same credibility in where the data's coming from. We understand that because that's critical. If we're going to make our next decision, do we trust this next data source? Do we trust the interpretation of that for this next phase? That continuity is really critical. So then when it gets to actually executing the migration, well, that's probably a little bit more in our foray. It's, we've got the tools to help you convert databases, to bring environments across. In this particular case, a lot of VMware tooling as well, very relevant to help move workloads over to AWS. But it struck us that at this stage, you're no longer just monitoring a static existing environment, and you know you'll be able to understand what your new environment looks like. But this was something that we were nearly 2,000 VMs for this particular project. This wasn't going to be done in a Saturday afternoon. So if this was going to take months, we've got to run our production environment transitioning across over a period of months, cutting over service by service and still understanding the availability of that whole environment and ensuring that it's optimized in all of its transitional states. So this is where it started to get a bit more complicated.
This is also an opportunity where New Relic's platform was able to show up with programmability. So we've spoken a lot about these nerd packs and these projects, these applications that you can build on top of that NRDB. We utilized that flexibility to satisfy a niche use case that actually ended up being something we can replicate with anybody going through a migration like this. But it came from the power of partnership between these two techie guys sitting down and walking through what is it actually required, what data points do we need to track in real time, and what are the true pain points for the customer. In this case, it was getting a clear context of, given what we have today sitting in our data center before we ever move, what is the conservative cost if we just lifted and shifted that into AWS before even right-sizing? And so what we did is we built an integration that could talk to VMware and pull out the necessary metrics. We also built an integration into AWS to pull in inventory so we could see the like-for-like EC2 instance size and cost. And we were able to put that in a visualization very easily with one integration to vCenter and map it for the customer to say, okay, well, based on your 700 VMs in this particular environment and data center location, those would nearest map to these particular EC2 sizes. And based on Sydney pricing API from AWS, it would map to this type of cost. So I could easily see, worst case scenario, this is what it's going to look like hourly, daily, through to yearly to run these existing VMs in VMware in an AWS-based environment. This gives them confidence, and this is in real-time data flowing from the target environment. So it's not like we have to take a static snapshot and hope that was enough of a baseline. It's constantly updating based on the availability and the resource usage. So what we did is we followed the methodology and mentality AWS gave us, which is this idea of create a business plan, optimize where you can before you move, and then you have to track the migration through and optimize what's running then in AWS. So there's multiple stages to this migration project. So the next one here takes it the next step further. It says, okay, well, we have our baseline. But what if we took it a step further? What if we looked at the actual resource usage against what is allocated to these VMs? What if we could actually say, by optimizing for hosts that never got above 50% CPU or memory over a whole week, what if we could take that VM size that we think we need and actually pick a smaller EC2 instance or a more memory or CPU optimized instance? And it gives us an output of each VM that could be right-sized, what instance type in AWS it could be right-sized towards, and the effective savings that you would get. So this is really powerful because, again, it's real-time data, stuff that you're used to seeing within the New Relic platform, but it's leveraging an integration on the VMware side and infrastructure and essentially giving you a really complete picture that you have confidence stepping into this migration, that the cost isn't going to run away on you.
And Max, just pick up on that too, because you might be thinking, well, why do I need real-time data around something I've already made a decision about? This is a plan. I've gotten the data for my plan. I'm confident in it. I've got a sponsor. I've got some money. Let's go. The thing is, some of these things take a while, and 4 to 6 weeks later, someone is wondering, is that still the right data? Is my environment still in that same state? At the same time, an archive project had just cleaned up 10 petabytes of backup and old data somewhere. A decommissioning project was coming along and was probably going to take out 20% of the VMs. So I want to make sure at each stage that I'm still dealing with right now information. And the fact that I've got a real-time dashboard that reflected my deep analysis plan, I can just check daily. I can be sure we're on track. If something has moved significantly from why I started down this, even a sprint, I can stop or I can rechart and I can keep making the right decisions.
By the way, the data that we're populating in here is exportable and again distributed to AWS or any of your migration partners, right? So it's the same data that's fueling the reports that your teams are looking at, as well as the budgets and the forecasting and reporting that come out of your actual provider. So this is a live tracker of how far along you actually are at physically moving these VMs from source data center to AWS cloud-based environment. We do this through a set of basically tagging. So as you decommission a VM and spin it up in AWS, it can track how many of those VMs have moved across, and it gives you a live feed over the course of that period of time. But how are we actually tracking against our timelines? Right? If you've given yourself a budget and a timeline for this, are we actually going to hit? Do we need to work to prioritize this particular effort or work closer with AWS and New Relic to get to pull this off in the expected timeline?
And so instead of answering this question with your project manager coming around and checking how many VMs did you migrate yesterday, Max? It's like, oh, I think it was 5 or 15. Did you remember to turn the old ones off? Oh, I think so, I don't remember. Just that's something you can just track in real time. The dashboard is showing you as it's happening. All right.
The final piece here is leveraging that same right-sizing logic, that same methodology of right-sizing before you moved it. Well, once you land, oftentimes the platform team manages the costs, they manage the spinning up of the agents or essentially the overall cost of the environment, but the application teams maybe decide what instances they want, when to spin them up and down. And so monitoring that and making sure that people are utilizing the cloud-based environment in the right way, effectively leveraging the budget as maximized as possible, that's really easy through real-time monitoring in this nerdlet. So basically what we're seeing is for each of the provider AWS accounts that we've now moved VMs into, in terms of EC2 is now living in an AWS account, are those right-sized? For the last week, have they been using the right number of CPU or memory against the workloads we've been putting in there? Have we been turning off a dev environment when we need to and making sure that we're not wasting or using suboptimally the costs that we've been given for that
so
AWS.
We've really transitioned, haven't we? We've now had all the data we need to make these decisions to move and help us move faster and with confidence. But now, before it's finished, we're already optimizing. We're making sure that even the source environment is still being optimized. Where we're going to, and while we're still going there, we're still optimizing. So we're not worried about even a 2-hour blowout during the development and migration project to get to where we want to go.
So the final piece of this is that you'd usually set up in our nerdlet that we built, we're basically looking at this as a combination of a data center location and an environment. All right, so it's a logical grouping of a subset of your VMs. And in this case, as you start moving through those 4 tabs and those 4 reports that we showed you just a moment ago, it's actually progressing a status bar across the top. So at a very high level, you could look at a data center or 2 or multiple data centers that would have multiple environments running and see, okay, well, have we moved an entire data center's worth of environments enough? Are we ready to decommission it? Are we ready to shut down? Are we tracking in the right order in terms of which data center to fully migrate into cloud? So it's a really easy, very high-level way for management or for these application and SRE teams to see just how far we're progressing against this initiative.
So we've had a few screenshots on how we would visualize this data and how that's going to help us do our job, make sure we're on track. If we go back to something similar to the slide we had before, where we have these milestones of activities, we've got to make these decisions and plans, and we want to be informed about what to do next and have we got what we need to move forward. Think about coming back the other way now. As we optimize, we want to keep feeding back into that process and start building a loop. And I think we've probably seen enough there that help us understand that if we're optimizing as we go and we keep feeding that in, our migration project, our development project, whatever our deployment is always going to be following the reason why we started and tells us where we deviate, but are we using all resources to best effect? And plenty of benefits come from doing that. But the one thing that strikes me here is that applying a set of different tools to each of these pillars is going to have problems. It's going to take longer, and it's going to raise those questions. Can I trust this next tool as much as the last tool? If it's one ubiquitous connected platform using the same data set and applying it in different visualizations to each stage, you move a lot faster, it's a lot easier, and it takes away that uncertainty.
And we're seeing this help with reducing timelines to completion of migrations, budget, saving budget, bringing back budget that you thought you would need to spend, and just ensuring best practices that everyone's working off the same data, including your vendors.
Yep. So, looks a bit corny when I put it like that, but
it's a happy story. It's a true story. It's a happy true story.
It's a story of partnership. But really what made this work was our customer fed back to us that they really liked the way that AWS and New Relic partnered on this. Now, we don't think that was just a 2-way thing, it was a 3-way thing. It was them saying, well, this is what we trust New Relic for. Now, please work with us to help us get to that next stage. So the 3 parties working together really made this click. It meant that all of that complexity could be simplified. Not just through access to the data and visualization, but alignment of what everybody was trying to achieve through this process. We just worked in the spirit of partnership to make that happen. That made it all go a lot faster. Seeing what we want to achieve, having the access to the visualization so we understood the data, got us there faster. And ultimately, optimizing came about as a set of recommendations through the tools. We've done this, well, thousands of times each company, and a lot of that has been built back into the tool set. So when we've done this for other organizations, things like in the nerdlets and the TSO logic baselines and algorithms, this is where we put all of the information about how various products are licensed, how they are best migrated, how they are managed, whether they should go on certain instance types. All of those rules are already there. So we're bringing our joint recommendations to the decision points as well to say, these are bad ideas. You'll hurt yourself if you go down that path. These are good ideas. We recommend that go forward with less issues.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, this was just one of those beautiful moments where we could take thought leadership from both vendors, combine it with a customer pain point, and actually came out with something that was, in the end, repeatable. Right, so this is something that programmability rose to the occasion. Rather than just building a dashboard that sort of satisfied it, we could really build a curated experience that all parties at the onset of this presentation can use together, can use with their vendors to achieve success quicker and a bit more cost effective.
For sure. As far as what to do next, we found Marketplace was a really good way to help in this particular situation. That gave the customer a way to acquire the New Relic products in commercial and deployment terms that they were happy with. So that, I think that helped accelerate things. There's other ways.
Yep, so the New Relic site, it's a fantastic resource for essentially getting into these migrations, learning about how New Relic approaches it, and leveraging the team. So again, this entire thing was built out of customers providing feedback and these teams combining to build a very bespoke tool for them. Right? So this was turned around in a matter of months, really.
Yeah, and this is what we're here for, so come talk to us about it if you want to know more. Expand. So as far as we're concerned, when we started on this, the VMware environment we were talking about, New Relic was across most of it, but there were a few exceptions. I think it wasn't across some of the sandpit and training environments, things like that. We said, well, if you just expand the New Relic footprint across all of it, we can understand the whole environment. We can do something with all of that. So that made sense to the customer, and I think they pretty much haven't stopped on rolling that out now, because of now they're seeing that, oh wow, I was thinking about this costing me an extra 3 cents or whatever it was, but now I realize if I actually understand what's there, I can make much more significant decisions about what's most cost effective for me.
And if you guys have seen the 12 open source projects they've released as part of Programmability, the other one, Cloud Optimize, was built with this customer as well. So to that point, they realized they can do this on all of the existing infrastructure they've deployed out into AWS and find additional right-sizing opportunities. So please do find us at the Hacker Lounge to see these, to discuss this one in particular as well, or any other ideas that you might have around what you'd want to bring to life.
That's us. Thanks very much for listening. Come and find us afterwards if you'd like to know more about it.